My name is Knighten. I'm the Associate Pastor for Children and Families at Staples Mill Road Baptist Church, which is northwest Richmond. I've been there about 30 years. Before that, I was at seminary and I ministered to preteens at a church there. And before that, I was in south side of Richmond for 4 years as a children's minister at a church there. So I've been in children's ministry for quite some time. And as a children's pastor, I have a lot of empathy for this situation. Help needed recruiting, equipping, and retaining volunteers for VBS and beyond. Now, my experience, unfortunately, does not make me an expert on the solution to this problem. What it makes me is an expert on the problem itself. Children's ministry is unique among ministries because most ministries, you are hired for your ministry directly to that group. So senior adult ministers minister to senior adults. Youth ministers, if they have to, can get all the youth in one big room and speak to them all there. But children's ministers are hired for their skills with kids and then told you will never be working with kids. You will always be working with volunteers who then work with children. It's just the nature of the ministry because you have babies, you have fifth graders. You're not going to be working with them all together in a room just yourself. You're going to be relying on volunteers. And so actually one of the biggest skills a children's pastor can have is not the ability to juggle or play the guitar or tell a funny story to kids. One of the best skills they can have is the ability to recruit and equip and train volunteers. Unfortunately, that's also not one of the things they teach in seminary. And it's not one of the things that draws you to children's ministry. Most of the time when you get involved in children's ministry, as I'm sure most of you have experienced, it's because you love kids and you love serving. And so we end up in this difficult place of saying, we need more help, and I don't know how to do it. And when Ms. Cheryl asked me to consider what I'd be speaking on, I looked at several options, and I thought, here's an area that I myself dread every year. I dread August, where I know I'm going to spend hours and hours on the phone calling people and feeling like I'm begging and feeling like I am asking them to do something that they don't want to do and feeling like I'm putting upon them. And what that generates in me is not the love, joy, peace, and patience, and kindness, and goodness, and faithfulness that's the fruit of the Spirit. It engenders resentment and frustration and disappointment. And so I thought, I should not be dreading that time of year. If I'm dreading this process of recruiting, that suggests that somewhere along the way, I haven't figured it out yet. And since it is my job to figure it out, I said this year, that is what I will speak on. And it forces me to prepare for this, to present you with what I found. And so as I speak, know that I don't speak as somebody who's got it all figured out. I don't speak as somebody who's even put all these things into place yet. But as I've read and studied and looked at other churches, these are some of the things that I've found that will help you to come at recruiting, equipping, and retaining volunteers from a perspective and with a method that's going to bring you peace and joy and fruit in your ministry. Does that sound like what you want for today? Good, because that's what I want to give you. How many of you guys came here because you have to recruit for children's ministry as a whole, whether it's Awana or whether it's Sunday school or children's church? You're looking because you do a lot of recruiting across the ministry. All right. How many of you are here because you're just looking at VBS? That's what you got. You got VBS, you're recruiting for VBS. Well, there will be content here for both of you, but there will be a few things you say, that's really just for the VBS. It's not as applicable ministry-wide. And there will be quite a few things that are, I come at it from a ministry-wide perspective. I'm recruiting for all of children's ministry all year round. And so there's a lot of these things that are somewhat geared towards that, but most of it can be shifted with a little perspective for either situation. So I hope that you find something that is useful for you. But before moving forward, we will do some door prizes very quickly. If you will look under your chair, and if there's a Post-it note stuck to the bottom of your chair, you win a prize. There are only two. You might want to check the chair next to you. Post-it note. All right, you will be winning Simply Strategic Volunteers. Oh my. If it's that hard to find, it's not there. This is Simply Strategic Volunteers. I'll talk about this resource in a minute. Congratulations. And this is Nelson Searcy's Connect, how to double your number of volunteers. Sound like a winner? There you are. It's good. In fact, that is how we will start today. We will look at our first things, recommended resources. These are in your little booklet. So if you didn't want to get one of these, once again, I have some in the front and probably a couple in the back still. Recommended resources. I'm going to recommend 4 book or booklet for you this time. The first 2 are the one-on-ones I just handed out. Connect, how to double your number of volunteers. This book is very good for a church-wide system for recruiting volunteers, and also a theological perspective and a theology of service, which will help get your church, your church, and your church membership all in line about understanding what ministry is and what serving is. And so it's a new perspective, very good book. The second one is The New Breed. It's that red cover book right up there. It talks about the changes in culture and how that has affected volunteering. And then it talks about, as a church, how do you recruit volunteers when people view volunteering so differently than they have in years past. And so, very good book. Second 2 books, one is Simply Strategic Volunteers. I gave it to that young lady right there. I have another copy up here. Simply Strategic Volunteers is great because it gives you little nuggets all through the book. Each one's about 2 pages, and it's something you can do one a week, and it gives you ways to recruit, ways to encourage, different ways to look at viewing, little things you can send out. Lots of great ideas there, and it's very little nugget size, so you can take it as you go. Because we don't all have time to read 3 books in a row and then form a giant system. So that will help you get started there. And finally, you have the Volunteer Management Toolkit. If you have to recruit next week and you don't have time to work out a whole system, this will get you started. It's very much an outline format. It's very small. It gives you a very nuts and bolts, step-by-step approach to how to begin recruiting for, say, Vacation Bible School. This was just the basics very quickly. So it won't do everything that we're trying to do today. It says, basically, here's your next step. Take your step, take your step. So this is very worthwhile if you're a VBS and you've got to recruit for, well, now. And it also has resources like forms you can download and samples and things like that. So those are your 4 resources. I strongly suggest that you check one or more of them out, read the reviews on Amazon, pick what you think will fit you best. All right. So moving forward, the challenge as we see it. Here's the challenge of recruiting and equipping and retaining volunteers. First one is that ministry requires people to serve. In fact, minister means serve. So if you're going to be teaching classes, you need teachers, right? And if you're going to be taking care of kids, you need somebody who can change diapers, somebody who can set out centers and clean things and all set out snacks. You need volunteers to minister, okay? Even a one-pastor church needs people to minister. If nothing else, it needs the pastor, right? And so ministry requires people to serve, and excellence in ministry requires talented people to serve. People with gifts, people with talents, people with skills and knowledge. And so if you want to have a ministry that sometimes has some drama, you know, somebody come in and do a skit dressed up as Moses, well then you have to have somebody who A, knows how to put together a costume, and B, knows how to act like they're Moses and teach a lesson that way. You know, if you want to have crafts, there are people who have skills in crafts, and there are people who can't put together one of the Oriental Trading foamy kits, you know? You have a broad range of abilities in different areas. And so if you want excellence in ministry, you want some of these different things, you're going to have to find folks with those skills to provide those things. Right? Challenge 1 and 2. Challenge number 3, culture has changed. Gone are the days of the obligated long-term volunteer. Now, it's not just the kids. Sometimes we think it's just that younger generation, all right? But it's not. It's my generation too. It's my parents' generation. It is a cultural shift in how we view volunteers, and that's what that second book is talking about, the new breed of volunteers. There's been a cultural shift in how people view volunteering and how they're willing to serve. Now, you could say perhaps there was once a day when church members felt obligated to serve in all areas of the church. Realistically, I think even that's probably a bit nostalgic, probably a bit of rose-colored glasses. I think it's always been a struggle. But I think a new culture, cultural views have made it even more of a struggle for us as we try to hold on to traditional models. So that's sort of the challenge. And then what does that look like? Oh wait, let me give you 10 cultural seismic shifts. This is from that book, New Breed. So these are 10 big cultural changes. Family dynamics. From Father Knows Best to 2.5 Men. All right, families have changed. The roles and the responsibilities, the busyness of families. It is no longer the nuclear family with the stay-at-home mom. VBSs have moved to evenings or weekends or things like that because you don't have people who are at home and can come spend a week serving at VBS often. Not enough people pull up. And so as dynamics have changed for the families, so have their ability to serve in long-term roles or with large chunks of time. Number 2, isolation from community to individualism. You'll see less and less community both in your churches and in the world at large. And one of the results of that is without community comes a loss of obligation. When you don't have those relationships with peers and friends and other families, you feel less of an obligation to serve them and to do things to benefit them. And so you're less likely to sacrifice for them. Flexibility from rigid scheduling to volunteer availability. People want to serve when they have time and as they have time. Not necessarily according to your schedule, but they prefer it according to their schedule. And I can understand that. I often do the same way. Generations, from experienced veterans to novice generation Y, the texting generation. They do things differently, they see things differently, and so you're going to have some cultural conflict just as you try to relate to a generation that likes to do and talk and see things differently than you do. Technology, from face-to-face to cyberspace. This also has to do with the isolation and community idea, but you're seeing more reliance on technology, more interaction through technology, and so professionalism, from skilled workers to knowledge workers. And what that means is that in a lot of ways, the skills and talents that your volunteers are bringing are different than the years that they used to have. You had a lot more hands-on skills and knowledge. Now often you see folks who are very good at technology or computer or social media or are able to provide knowledge and input in different ways than what they've had before. That also means they want to serve in the areas they know. They want to have input and be empowered to make decisions in those areas. And so they don't want to be micromanaged and told exactly what to do. They want to be able to use their knowledge. Episodic volunteering, so instead of long-term commitments, they're more willing to commit to short-term projects. They don't want to, especially open-ended projects are a thing of the past. Slacktivism. It's a combination of slackers and activism. That's sort of a trend these days. If you think about when the disaster in Haiti happened, American Red Cross, one of their big ways of raising support was text this text to this number and contribute $10. Somebody can feel good, they can do it in 20 seconds, and they've contributed to relieving Haiti. And it was a huge success for American Red Cross. They saved lots of money. So it's not necessarily all a bad thing, but it is definitely a cultural shift. The culture is looking for quick, easy ways to make an impact and feel good about what they're doing. Micro-volunteering. So even more than episodes where they're not willing to do long-term open-ended projects, they want to find bite-sized projects that they can do in 15 or 20 minutes and get it done. And so it changes the way you present things to them. Finally, speed. Slow movements to fast responses to change. Our culture has changed, and everything changes much more quickly than it used to. It makes it difficult to equip volunteers when your ways of relating to them keep changing faster than you can change with them. I had somebody tell me the other day they don't use Facebook. Facebook's old school. They use, what is the thing they use? I don't know. Snapchat, Instagram. Yeah, some of them won't even use Instagram anymore. And so you got to keep up. It's pretty difficult, right? I mean, Facebook I thought was pretty great, but once their parents were on it, they didn't want to be on it anymore. And so with these cultural changes comes a new breed of volunteer. All right? This is also from the book, and here's my disclaimer. This isn't necessarily a biblical view of service. This is a cultural view of service. This is what often is out there in the world. This isn't even necessarily in the church, but in the world, this is the trends of volunteer. But this is what you have to be aware of is when you're looking for volunteers, these are some of the same things that are attractive to them and that they're going to be seeking. And so sometimes we'll see things here, we go, well, that's not what the Bible says serving should be like. And I would say, that's right. And in many ways, we need to understand that's where the volunteer might be, and we're going to be discipling them to teach them about biblical service. So with that said, first one is they're very busy, they have many obligations, and they often volunteer for multiple organizations. Your volunteers are not exclusive to the church, less so than ever. You have Girl Scout troop leaders, you have PTA treasurers, you have, well, you name it. There's a lot of ways to volunteer these days. So, volunteers want flexibility, more so than ever. They expect to be empowered. Remember I said they're knowledge workers, they have skills and abilities that they've learned, and they want to have a say in what's going on in the ministry and be able to set some directions. They won't tolerate working alongside incompetent volunteers. All right? That's one of those attitudes that is not necessarily biblical, right? So that's exactly the height of patience that the Spirit gives us, to say that I won't work with somebody that I don't think's up to my standards. But it is realistic, and you will run into that with volunteers. And so it's worth being aware of as you recruit. Is tech savvy? Doesn't want to simply make a contribution. The new breed of volunteer wants to make a difference. And so you have to connect what they're doing to the purpose of the church and help them to see the value of their service and the way it's making an influence on the purposes of the church. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And finally, they don't want to be micromanaged. They want to be empowered. All right, so what these challenges add up to us is that we are looking for volunteers, and we are running into these walls. And let me ask you if any of these sound like something you've thought. Here's one. I know Brad doesn't like teaching Sunday school. He shows up late, just hangs out in the classroom drinking coffee. He leaves as fast as he can, and he gets grumpy with the kids over silly things. But I don't have anybody else to take his place, and I don't want to ask him for anything that might make him quit. So we're all going to look the other way and let it keep going. Or, here's another one. If we can't get 3 more leaders, I guess we'll just cancel the 2-year-olds class next Sunday. Everybody will see how important it is when those kids are in their adult Bible studies. Anybody ever thought that? You don't have to raise your hand. All right. Here's another one. It's late summer. The new year's about to start. I've got 2 weeks until my Sunday school promotes and Awana starts back up. That's 14 days, 18 leader holes, 500 members, 100 phone calls to make. I'll get 40 no's, 25 maybe sometimes, 20 no callback awkward hallway dodges, 10 I'll think and pray about it, and 5 probablys to go. All right? And finally, ours. Wow, VBS is 2 months away and I still need a crafts director, lead teachers for 2 different classes, 4 toddler teachers, and about 15 more group guides. And nobody is stepping up. Do any of those sound familiar? Well, like I said, I'm not an expert on the solution. I'm presenting some ideas, but these are all thoughts that I have had and said because I've been there and I know where you are. But this is not where we ought to be, right? We can agree this is not where we ought to be, but we can also agree that this problem is not all on those silly volunteers who won't step up. This is also a mindset issue that we have to address. And so what I want to talk about today is a new plan for recruiting and equipping and training volunteers. Now with my time frame, we'll probably just get a new plan for recruiting volunteers, and then you'll have to wait for the other ones another time. But let's move forward. So a new plan for recruiting volunteers, and it starts with a new view, a new theology of service. And so here's what I want to talk about. Our common perspective on recruiting volunteers is fatally flawed, and it will inevitably lead to burnout, to frustration, anger, and resentment, which is not exactly the fruit of the Spirit. We need a new view on volunteers that is biblically rooted and brings joy and peace. And this view starts with us. It starts with our view of what volunteering means. It's a view that has to permeate our church as well, a view on what serving means and what it means to serve. And finally, it will work its way out to those who you are calling to serve. If you can begin with you, work it through your church, and get to those who are calling to serve, and then serving will become not an obligation, but maybe an expectation. I'm not quite sure what the word is I'm looking for, but let's work through it and you'll see what I mean. The first thing of our new theology of service is that serving is not how we get things done. Serving is what we're doing. We often view our ministries as something that has to get done, and volunteers are the ways to do it. They're a means to an end, right? Our Sunday school classes have to get taught, so we need teachers to teach them. Crafts have to be made, so we need volunteers to make crafts. We need these things to do the ministry, right? But what I'm saying here is that serving is not how we just, it's not just how we get things done. I should have put just in there. Serving is what we're doing. Calling people out to serve is a big part of the ministry itself. Look, for example, at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. It says, "And he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ." And so those first four roles, we tend to start thinking about spiritual gifts, but that's not really the point of this. Those four roles were the leaders of the church at that day. Paul is saying the leaders of the church, their role is to, and here's where he goes on to, it's not to do the ministry. Their role is to equip the saints, the body of Christ, for the work of ministry. We are to call people into service. We are to equip people into service. That is our ministry, is calling them to serve and equipping them to serve. And through that, we will be building up the body of Christ. We will be attaining to the unity of the faith and knowledge of the Son of God. And we'll be teaching people to become like Christ. And so our first perspective change is that we're not looking for volunteers so we can do ministry. We are looking for volunteers because that is our ministry. We are calling them to serve because that is what God has called us to do, is to serve. We are to be servants. And so our big part of our ministry is equipping volunteers. It's not that they're the means to the end. They are the end in themselves. Let's go for a little bit more of what that looks like. We said we're attaining to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. To be like Christ, Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. "So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, and being in full accord and of one mind. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." And so, first off, there's this call to look at others as more important than ourselves, to serve each other, to come humbly to one another, and to be unified, and to look out for the interests of others. And then he goes on to say, and here's what that's going to be like. "You're going to have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of man, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father." We're calling people into the service to be like Christ. Christ, who is the King of heaven, who came and humbled himself not only to become a man, but humbled himself to become a servant of man, to die for men on the cross, to take the curse of sin, to serve sacrificially for men. And that's what we're calling people to be like. That is our ministry. It's not just to the kids, but our ministry is to make disciples by making people like Christ, by making them servants. Everybody with me? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Thumbs up? All right. Our ministry is not just to the kids, our ministry is to the volunteers. We call and equip them to serve because it is in serving that they grow in Christ, that they learn to be like Christ. But not only that, Jesus calls us directly to serve. So not only does Paul say we should be like Christ, Christ himself says you should be servants. Every believer is called to be a minister. Matthew 20, verses 25 through 28, Jesus called to him and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be your slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus says, you're not supposed to be the Lord over everybody. That's not what it means to serve. All of you, if you want to be great, you must be a servant, and you must be a slave, just as I came not to be served, but to serve, sacrificially. Matthew 23:11, "The greatest among you shall be your servant. John 13:34 and 35, Jesus tells the disciples, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, that you are also to love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The first two great commandments: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, right? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? First two commandments. And then here Jesus gives a third commandment, and he says it's a new commandment. It's unlike the other two. It's different. First, you're supposed to love God with everything we have. Then you're supposed to love your neighbor purposefully, sacrificially. But now I want you to love each other. What's different about that? It's a reciprocal love, right? You love the world, they might not love you back. That's not what we're called to do, right? It doesn't say you and the world love one another, because the world probably not going to love you, right? We're supposed to love the world. But our love for each other is supposed to be so unique, so different, that all the world says there must be something different about them. These followers of Christ have a reciprocal love. They are taking care of each other. A new theology of service says we serve each other because that's how we become like Christ. That's how we mark ourselves as his disciples. We serve each other sacrificially and reciprocally. We do it for one another, back and forth. And so that is a theology of service. And finally, when we stress about finding volunteers, we're doubting that the head of the church can supply the needs of his church. Colossians 1:15 through 20 talks about Christ, and it says, "He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together." Jesus Christ is the Lord over everything. Creation was through him. He is before all things. He is in all things. He keeps all things together. And here's what it says in verse 18. "And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross." Who's the head of the church? Christ is. It's not you or me. It's not my church. It's not my ministry. It's his ministry. It's his church. And when we stress out about volunteers and about making something happen, we're telling him that our plan's not working and that we don't trust him to do what he wants to do. And so a good theology of service recognizes it is his church and it is his to equip. He is the head of the church, he's passionate about the church, and he's supremely able to provide whatever is needed for the church. Keep calm and know that I am God. Galatians 5:22 and 23 says the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Does this sound like you when you're recruiting? And I don't say it accusingly, because I know this stuff is for me. This doesn't sound like me when I'm recruiting. I'm stressed. And so I know that this is not what's in my life, then there's a problem in my spirit, and there's a problem in my understanding of what God's Word says. And so I need to reset myself. This is what we're looking for. Joy and peace and patience. Psalm 46, "Be still and know I am God." I would read you the whole thing because it's a wonderful, wonderful passage, but we don't have time for all of Psalm 46. But let me tell you, that's where that phrase comes from. Be still and know I am God. And Psalm 46 talks about God's sovereignty over all of the earth. His providence, his ability to take care of everything according to his will. So we can rest in that. We can be still and know that he is God. We can find peace in that. In fact, speaking of peace, Philippians 4:6-7, many of you have this verse memorized. "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." So these passages are not just useful for helping us create a theology of the church. They're useful for helping us to reset our hearts as we're in the middle of this volunteering recruiting process. And so the first and probably the best thing I can give you today is this theology of service, where you know that when you're calling people, you're not calling them to say that they owe you something. You're not calling them to do something that's an imposition on them. You're not calling them to give up something. You're calling them to serve as Christ has served. You're calling them to be his disciples, to learn to be like Christ. And you can find peace in that, and you can find peace in knowing that God is entirely in control and is able to be sovereign over his ministry. Amen? So with that, there's 8 theological foundations of ministry. These are from the book Connect by Nelson Steersley. This is sort of a summation of what we just talked about. First one is ministry means to serve. It is that simple. Sometimes people think they have to be qualified for ministry, but ministry means serve. And anybody can serve. And so when we're calling people to minister, help them to understand that if you're willing to serve, you're able to minister. Serving is the act of putting the needs of others before our own needs. It is sacrificial. It is humble. The goal of the ministry system is to help people become like Jesus. You can't become like Jesus unless you learn to be a servant. I think we've covered that. Serving opens people's hearts and is therefore a part of worship. Romans 12:1. Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercies, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. How do we worship there? We're offering our bodies as living sacrifices to God. In giving everything we have, that is our act of worship. So people are worshiping as they're serving. Serving is worship. If people aren't serving, they aren't truly worshiping and growing in their faith. That is the other side of that. And mobilizing people for ministry is a part of discipleship. One of the ways we help people become like Jesus is teaching them and calling them to serve. And finally, the role of the pastor is to equip people for ministry. That was from that verse from Ephesians. But I'll go on to say even further, the role of the ministry leader, the role of you guys, is to equip people to minister. That is our role. But certainly it is the role of the pastor as well. So that is the theology of serving. And that's probably one of the most valuable things I have for you today, because I want you to be able to reset your hearts when you're calling people to serve, and to be able to do it from peace and joy and knowing that you're calling people to be like Jesus. And I also want you to be able to start putting those things into place that are going to help the church to understand. That involves getting pastoral buy-in, that involves teaching in different ways, but service needs to become a part of your church in a way that they understand that this is a part of being a disciple of Christ, and this is what we call everybody to be a part of. All right, so creating a recruiting system. Now that we've gotten a new view of who we're calling, why we're calling, and what we're calling them to, let's take a look at how to call them into it. Now, some of these are going to be a little scary, all right? Because if you realize that our role is to call all of the body into serving, and it is, right? That's what it means to be a disciple. We're supposed to disciple all believers, so we're supposed to teach everyone to serve. Then we've got to create space for all of those servants, okay? We've got to make, basically we're creating need. And so you thought I was going to tell you how to eliminate your need. I'm about to tell you how to make more need. Okay? And it is a little scary. This is out of these books, and you might have to pace yourself. So don't just jump home and then do all these things and then call me next week and say, you broke my church, okay? So pace yourself. But here's some of the things that I've found and some of the things that are suggested. So we're going to make space for a new kind of volunteer role, for a new kind of volunteer. Realizing that we're calling people who view volunteering a different way, we've got to create roles that are a little bit different and that create space for them to serve in a way as we disciple them and teach them what it means to serve. Bite-sized projects. We learn to break our serving roles into smaller bits. And so if you have a leader that comes in an hour before the program, sets everything up, does the teaching and the craft, cleans everything up and goes home, right? They're there for 4 hours. Maybe you break that into 4 different roles. Somebody who comes in and sets up 3 things. Or you can break it into even more roles. Somebody who just does the craft. Somebody who just sets out these things. And so you're looking to make smaller bite-sized projects. Remembering the new volunteer wants a small defined project. They want flexible time. They want to be able to define it clearly and to know they're going to be in and out in however much time. You can say, hey, I just need somebody who can come in for 20 minutes before the program starts and set up the stage. That's all I need you to do. Can you do that? And they say, I can do that. And then I can go on to my life group. So you're creating bite-sized projects that allow you to fit people into more serving roles. All right? That's what we're doing, is we're creating space. Another thing you can do is mandatory term limits on serving. All right? Now, earlier I was talking about time limits, and I was talking about, you're going to define how long they're going to be serving, and we haven't talked about it a lot yet, but the idea is, when you commit to teaching, you're going to commit for this year. And then next year, usually what we do is you commit for a year, and then at the end of the year, we'll ask you if you do it again. At the end of the year, we'll ask you if you do it again. This says a mandatory term limits, and what they're talking about is all of our servants, and this, if you're a teacher, you teach for 3 quarters, and we require that you take the 4th quarter off. Is that a little scary? Yeah, it is a little scary. That scares me. The guy who wrote the book said it scared him. But here's a few things that does. Number one is it teaches your leaders that they have to be bringing somebody up along with them who can take that spot for that semester that they're going to be off. It creates space. Once again, if you're trying to mobilize your entire church to serve, it makes places for them to serve. All right? That's probably the 2 big things that it does. All right? But it is a little scary. And so be thinking about how you can do that and if that's something you want to bite off. But they encourage it. And like I said, it's scary for me too. But give it a try, I think. But if I give it a try, will you give it a try? Yeah, right. Yes, sir.
Won't say anything about like rotation, maybe how if they rotate between, your help. There you go.
Consider rotating teams. That's right. Another way to create space for more volunteers is to have teams that rotate through different programs. And so A team, B team, C team. All right. Now all of these are a little unique in that in children's ministry is different than all the other ministries of the church. Partly because you cannot have Joe, who just walked in off the street, go straight into taking care of changing diapers and stuff in the classroom. All right, we have needs, and I think I got ahead of myself here. And so we'll cover more of that later. But you do have to be aware that you can't just rotate anybody through. You still have to be considering all these things in light of the fact that your volunteers in certain roles need to be screened, and you need to know who they are and that they can teach and things like that. So. But consider rotating teams, A, B, and C teams for different tasks. And so somebody will serve every 3rd week maybe, or they'll serve for a month on and then a month off, or different ways to do rotating teams. All right, all of those are to create space in your ministry for the new volunteers. Next, we're going to talk about creating entry points into ministry. All right, these are the ways that you're going to be bringing people in. And if our new breed of volunteers feel less obligated to serve, they prefer short-term commitments, they like seeing how their efforts will change things, and they like seeing that before they volunteer. And they want flexibility, and they're not going to respond to our traditional short help-needed ad for an ongoing position. And that's typically how we do it. We might do it in 3 different ways, but they all pretty much say the same thing. We need more teachers. Please sign up to come teach. Sometimes we'll say, we need more teachers for this year. We might let you out of it next year. But that's pretty much what we say. We just need more teachers. And so knowing what our new volunteer looks like, your ads are getting less and less response. Fewer and fewer people are willing to commit. And often the ones who do aren't necessarily the ones that you really wanted in there, or that you are the best fit for that. And so here's what I've seen. This is actually in a couple of different books. This idea of creating first dates. And a first date is a small one-time volunteer opportunity that introduces a volunteer to your ministry, to serving, and to the potential for some of the different serving roles they can take in. And so an example would be a painting party for VBS. Say, hey, 2 Saturdays from now, we're going to be painting all the decorations for VBS. It's going to be a great time. Lots of people are coming. We're going to have music and cupcakes, and we're going to paint all the decorations for VBS. And then you consider and call, 5 or 6 people that you really want to introduce to your ministry, but who if you called them and asked them to serve as a teacher this next year, they're probably going to say, I don't really think I want to do that. And so you bring them in here and you say, it's a one-time thing. They're not making a long commitment, but they're meeting people. They're getting to know about your ministry. You're getting to know them. They're being introduced to who they are and kind of some of their skills and talents and background. So it's a chance to meet people and what we're going to call is kind of a courtship of a volunteer. Another example is actually ministry with the kids. You can say we're going to have a special Friday night movie night with the elementary group. Okay, and I need 4 volunteers. I need somebody to come serve popcorn. I need somebody who can run the projector, or whatever. It's just short, small little roles that you can invite somebody in. It's an introductory position, and they know it's a limited commitment, so they're not committing long term. They know exactly the scope of what they're supposed to do. And so you're going to personally recruit for these first dates. There's no substitute for your personal invitation. You're going to be calling people. You're going to evaluate your candidates, so you're looking for people who you think might be a good fit for the ministry later. You're going to clearly define the task. It might just be, I want you to greet people at the front door and check them in as they come in for this event. And then you're going to make the big ask. And every time you ask somebody to serve, you're going to be linking it to a greater purpose. Everybody wants to know that their service is somehow not just contributing, but is a part of a greater cause. And we have a great cause in the church, right? That somebody who's serving snacks needs to know how their serving snacks helps people to come to know Christ and to become devoted followers of Him. And so you have to start to learn to draw that picture for people. Here is the value of this service, from the smallest thing to the biggest thing. So even if somebody's greeting people when they're coming in for this one-time event, even you're going to still very quickly introduce them to the value of greeting. You're going to be meeting parents. They're going to be dropping off our kids with this. You're helping them to feel good about our church. This is actually an introduction to our church for them. So we're hoping that through this, the parents will feel comfortable with our church and come back for worship service the next Sunday. You're making that link. And then through worship, hopefully they'll come to know Christ. You know, draw the chain. That's what he calls it, linking the chain. And so you're going to do that with all your ministry roles, even this small one for this first date. As they come to your first date event, whatever that may be, you're going to make sure that the volunteer has great leadership and direction. Okay? You don't want somebody coming to serve, and then when they get there, there's nobody to tell them what to do, they don't know where to go, or they feel useless, right? You want them to have a great experience and to feel well taken care of. You want to make every attempt to check in with the volunteer and get to know them. So if you can find some time during the event to go talk to them, get to know what some of their skills and abilities and talents are, get to know where their heart is, all right? You're also going to help the volunteer understand the ministry better and to hear stories of the ministry. If you can show that this child who just came to us last year to our Awana program, he didn't know anything about the Bible, but listen to him now. He can tell you the whole Old Testament. Have the kids recite the Old Testament to your new prospective volunteer, you know? Or this Johnny has been with us for a long time, and he just was baptized last Sunday, you know? You want to talk about a good sell to a volunteer. That's a great thing for a volunteer to hear. Hey, my ministry with this ministry is helping kids become followers of Christ. This one just got baptized, and that one does the whole Old Testament now, you know? And so you're going to be doing that at these events. You can consider, one of the books recommends a second date, and so you're going to continue the courtship, all right? At a certain point, you say, hey, you've seen the ministry. I would love for you to consider plugging into this ministry in this way. Okay, and so what you're doing is you're letting these volunteers get to know the ministry, get to know how it works, what the value is of it, and to see what their role might be in it. What do you think? Yes?
Do you approach a potential volunteer with a specific position in mind when you're approaching them after you've seen how they interact? Or do you just go and say, hey, we'd love for you to serve in some capacity, these are what we have available, kind of thing? Or is that too overwhelming for a volunteer coming in?
There's a couple different ways to kind of look at it. One is, yes, I would think you would say you would gear it towards a couple of different ones that you think are a particularly good fit for them. But also, if you look a little bit later in your packet, and I don't know if we'll get there or not, I'm almost out of time already, is that right?
You started late.
That was quick. We have what's called the ministry ladder. And the ministry ladder, the idea behind the ministry ladder is that as you're integrating volunteers into your ministry, they start off at roles that are very introductory. And so they're starting off as greeters or as snack fixers or things like that. And what you do is you define a ladder of your ministry that gives additional responsibility, additional requirements, additional skills. And so as they start off, you're going to have certain roles that these are where people pretty much always start in our ministry. They're going to be a helper, they're going to be a craft fixer, a snack fixer, a greeter, or something like that. The next role would be, they're going to move into the classroom, or they're going to move into a teacher, they're going to be a Sunday school director. And so you have sort of additional responsibilities. Each time you're clearly defining the task, you're clearly defining the requirements, which are going to be higher each time. So for your teachers, you're going to be not only doing background screening, but you're going to be doing also, you're going to want to talk to them about their testimony and make sure that, their doctrinal background is solid and things like that. And so when you talk to these volunteers at these first dates, you're already going to have some positions sort of set up these are introductory positions in our ministry. They're ongoing, so it's not just the one-off thing, but it's still not, I'm moving you straight into full-time teacher. Okay? Now the exception to that would be if you already know this person, you've had a relationship with them, you know they're a great fit for a teacher, you already know their doctrinal background, they just haven't been able to do it. maybe this first date is the chance actually to integrate them back into ministry and remind them why they love working with kids. And so that would be somebody you might say, hey, you are ready to teach, and I know you're made for it. I just wanted to remind you by bringing you here, you know? All right, creating entry points into ministry. Sorry, I've lost my sheet here. All right, create a team building network. All right, don't be the only person who's trying to recruit for your ministry. Be willing to look for some folks who have connections in other parts of the church. Let them know, hey, here's what we were trying to do, and here's what these folks were. Who do you know that might be a great fit for this? Because you don't know everybody in your church. Well, you might know everybody in your church. I don't know everybody in my church. And so talk to people who know other people and can help you make those calls and can help you evaluate, you know, so-and-so might be a great fit for children's ministry. Hold a ministry job fair. Use big days and special events to challenge people to serve further. You know, somebody might be willing to come out for a one-day thing, but they haven't been serving regularly. But you bring them out for the one-day thing, much like the first date, you introduce them to the ministry, and then you challenge them, hey, we would love for you to be a part of our ministry going forward. Make it a part of the fabric of your church. We believe that serving is a key part of Christian growth, and we want to see every member involved in regular service in the church. That should be an expectation of being a part of the church, and that's what you're going for with that theology of service. So let me give you some key tips for recruiting. First one is that you want to take the fear away. You want to give time limits for jobs, and so you want people to understand that, hey, when you're committing, you're not committing indefinitely, but here's how long this job lasts. You want to do smaller jobs. That helps them to feel more comfortable with taking a role. You want to do rotating teams like we talked about before. You want to give them the chance to be a part of the ministry without having to actually do the work yet. So have a day where all of your leaders are invited to bring a friend who's going to just follow them around the ministry and see what they do, you know? Or invite them to come follow you around while you introduce them to different parts of the ministry. Let them see the ministry before you call them to do it. And then finally, clarity is key. For all of your positions, you need to have clear details of what the position is. You need to have their role. You need to have expectations and requirements lined out. And for your entry-level positions, that might be very small. It might just be a verbal, hey, I just need you to greet parents for 15 minutes as they come in. You know, but you still need to know who can do that and sort of say, here's where the forms are and here's how long you need to be here. But as they move into greater positions of responsibility, you need to have greater requirements. Hey, as soon as you move into a classroom, you have to have a background check and be screened. And as soon as you're teaching, we need to have a conversation about your testimony and things like that. You don't have to spell all that out from the first time they serve, but before you move them up into different roles. But you always want to be clear. You want to avoid the, oh, by the ways, right? These are the addendums after you sign on the dotted line. You say, yes, I will teach in your classroom. I'll be happy to teach. And they say, great, here's a curriculum. You go, oh, great, thanks. They go, and the trading weekend is next weekend. You go, oh, wait, what? And every third Sunday, you have to set out the chairs in this classroom and put these things away. You're like, oh, wait, I didn't know about that. Avoid the oh, by the ways. Think through the position really well ahead of time so you can give them the information up front. This is what this position entails. These are the things that are included. Because you might have a volunteer that will stick with you through the oh, by the ways, but they won't come back again. Because they know, oh, yeah, they might tell me this is what I'm doing, but really there's about 5 more things that I'm going to have to do. All right, key tips continued. Casting vision for volunteers. This is what I already talked about as far as linking their volunteering to the greater cause of the church. You want to be able to draw that change as to how what they're doing helps people come to know and follow Christ. We're going to avoid the word need. And that's partly based on your theology of service. It's not about the need. It's about making everybody into disciples of Christ. It's an opportunity for them to learn to be like Christ also. We talked about when volunteers can serve with children, some of the additional security. Make it easy for people to sign up for serve. For your introductory things, especially for your first dates, name and phone number. All right, spiritual gifts inventories are awesome, and they should wait. Honestly, a lot of people, they'll fill those out, and what you'll get is exactly what they kind of wanted to do anyway, because they haven't tried some of these other roles. And so let them come try out your ministry. And that's one of the great things about the ministry ladder idea is you have these in different areas of ministry. You might get somebody in as a greeter or whatever, and after you get to know them, you're like, hey, I like you. but you're not good with kids. You know? Have you thought about, and you might think, I've seen that you really like technology. Have you thought about the AV team? You know? And so let some people float, but let's let them discover their spiritual gifts in the active ministry rather than trying to define them ahead of time. And then it's like joining an athletic team. You know, I coach 7 or 8-year-old girls soccer, and I rotate them all through the positions. Now I have kids who come, they know they want to play goalie, right? But they've never played before. And so I say, we're all going to play different positions. You're going to learn about the different positions. You're going to try it out. And you might discover that you're actually quite a good left midfielder, you know? And so that's the same thing with ministry, is we discover things about ourselves by ministering in different contexts. And that gives you a chance to know what area is really the best fit for you through a little bit of trial. There's a place for spiritual inventories, but I think they're a little bit after a little bit of experience and serving. Finally, our focus should be on mobilizing as many as possible rather than as few as needed, because we're trying to make disciples. Never turn away a volunteer. It happens. Yeah, okay. And don't assume that no means never. When somebody says no, explore what's going on in their lives. What are the reasons they can't do it? They usually have good reasons. Talk to them, care about what's going on, and see if there's some way that they can serve that fits with what's going on with them. That's the whole point of creating these other roles, flexible roles, is there might be some ways to serve, people can serve at different times, and return to them later on. I know doesn't mean never, and if we're trying to make disciples, then we want to encourage people to be disciples over and over again, right?